Hi, you're watching Marketing Television, and I'm Elizabeth from Marketing Magazine.
Hi, I'm Prantik from Happy Marketer.
So we're here today to talk about the government and how they've actually changed their communication strategy through social media. Now, the Singapore government has been traditionally very notorious for their very strict media rules. And you know, in the 1970s, we were very famous for clamping down a lot on media. But lately, people have been, it's been a point of discussion lately that people from industry have been coming out to talk about where the boundaries have been. But I think one thing we can say is that through social media, there's been a drastic opening of their communication strategy. So obviously there's been pluses and minuses for this. And Prantik, what's some advantages you've seen?
I think I was really surprised. I've been in Singapore for 12 years, and it was a very positive welcome that probably starting the 2008 elections, we saw a gradual opening up. But I think the turning point was the 2011 GE, when you suddenly saw the Singapore government being far more open and accepting of the fact that the opposition parties could use online media to kind of voice out their opinion. And I think one of the key turning points in my memory was when Workers' Party started using or leveraging social media really well to not just talk about their opinions or discuss it, but also to orchestrate and mobilize people for their rallies. I think what's very famous and well documented is how they orchestrated the Al Junaid rally, where you had probably 40,000 people. Yes. I didn't get to go there, but I was at the rally, SDP rally in Holland Village, and I can tell you it was all orchestrated and channelized. In fact, it was live casted on social media as well. There were live tweets, there were live posts. So I think the very fact that there was an acceptance and openness about debate and discussion and discourse, I think that was a big plus, because at the end of the day, the populace in general is far more well informed. They get to hear both sides of the story, and hopefully, or perhaps that's good for the democratic development of the country.
And I saw a blog entry that you wrote on Lee Hsien Loong actually coming onto Facebook. How do you think that turns the strategy?
I think that, again, to me is a very, very positive strategy, because still he probably joined Facebook in April last year. So prior to that, the general notion was, at least in the minds of the people and including myself, that the PAP or the ruling government pretty much controls or monitors the offline media, and the online media belongs to the opposition party. But by openly embracing social media, I think what Lee Hsien Loong did was to really show that, look, he's very open to that media as well, those channels as well. And I think if you look at the blog that I penned, I think what I'm really happy about is the way that he's strategized his communication, or whoever's managing that for the government. He's very open about positives and negative challenges for Singapore, right? Open to debates, open to discussions around it. If there are any particular incidents or accidents that happen, I remember the Jurong accident that happened recently, he would empathize. So he's using the social media channel to empathize, to discuss, to have commentary. He's also using it to promote Singapore businesses. So I think there's a lot of positive thought behind how can he use social media to reach out the common Singaporeans and to relate to the common masses on the ground. Because I think post the results of 2011, I think the PAP perhaps was a bit worried that they're probably losing out touch with the common man in the heartlands, and they were perhaps perceived to be elitist. So I think it was a very positive step as far as I'm concerned in terms of Singapore's politics, in terms of PAP and Lee Hsien Loong's strategy as the Prime Minister. Because I think what also happened was, with him moving on to Facebook and social media, a lot of the other PAP leaders have embraced and actively using Facebook. And I think some of the classic examples would be ex-Foreign Minister Giorgio. I think he does a fabulous job as an ambassador at large to just share personal details about his trips, about his work. He just becomes a very relatable human being. Likewise, you have Indrani Raja, you have Lee Ishan, you have Teo Ser Luck, who all talk and appear very human on social media, and they talk about personal lives, professional lives, their grassroots work. So I think what's really happened, and what I like to observe, is you can relate to your leaders, you can reach out to them, and I think that's a very, very positive step.
No, that's a very good point you made. After the elections, they were talking about how they want to open up and listen to people more. It's a bold step, and it just forces you to listen.
Absolutely.
Forces you to have all the information, all the comments out in the open. But obviously, it's opening a whole can of worms, right?
Yes, of course.
So, what do you think about how they could? from a controlling like crisis communications.
Right.
How do you think they control it in social media?
That's right. So I think let's take the recent case in point of the whole discussion and a debate about the 6.9 million magical number, right? So there's been a lot of talk, a lot of banter and chatter about whether this is right, good or bad. So I think there have been a couple of interesting developments. So one is, while the government, I think, has been very responsible and proactive to release that white paper and open it up for discussion, I think what we have seen is, thanks to social media, there are very interesting communication channels coming up where people are openly discussing. So for example, something that we noticed recently was a Facebook page called PAP Confessions, where I don't know who's doing it, it's all anonymous. So people are requesting ministers, grassroots leaders to kind of share their opinion, their voice, either with their name associated with it or completely anonymous, to kind of allow people to voice out, be bold, and really reason out what's happening. So I think there was one particular post from a grassroots leader which was shared about 10,000 times, and he was very bold. He got his name out there, and he actually wrote to PM Lee as to what he thinks are the pluses and minuses. So I think, like you said, it's a can of worms, because moment you use social media, the negative of social media is, you could have rumors spreading around, you could have a lot of anonymous views, which could mean lack of accountability or responsibility. So that's something that needs to be managed and controlled well. Yeah. At the same time, as more and more politicians move into the social sphere, I think they need to be very, very careful in terms of managing and maintaining their image, their profile. So obviously, we had the unfortunate case of Mr. Michael Palmer, where while the news leaked via mobile, social media kind of amplified the whole thing, and it reached the whole of Singapore and probably the rest of the world within a matter of a day, right? So I think while it's probably a positive that the truth came out, but I think the risk is politicians have to be very, very careful in terms of what they speak, where they speak, right? Even if you looked at the Punggol by-election, right, there was a very funny video of the PAP candidate about him talking about the, how he has two cars and how having a car in Singapore is not not too big a deal. Now that was, I think, a bit tongue-in-cheek, and probably maybe he didn't mean it in that context. Slip of tongue, right? But well, in social media, slip of tongue could be very detrimental.
Amplified.
Very amplified, right? Yes. And amplified in a very very difficult manner. So I think what they really need to do is think through their communication strategy as to how are they going to proactively communicate, what aspects are they going to communicate. Probably the ministers in different parties need to orchestrate and plan who says what, right? Because they're going to be very responsible. And as you rightly said, they also need to have a contingency plan to manage crisis, because you don't know what creeps up from where.
Exactly.
So they need to know, how do I react? They need to have listening and monitoring tools to kind of preempt crisis, just like any brand or business would have to do.
Yeah. And do you think they actually have that in place already, and how do you think that structured?
Something tells me most of the political parties, whether through their agencies or whether through their advisors, I'm sure these are very, very senior spokespersons, because the fundamentals of communication don't really change. So I'm sure there is someone vetting their comments, there is someone advising them on what to say in terms of language, in terms of the tonality. So I'm fairly confident that most of the major parties have a crisis communication place, have a strategy, because I think, again, going back to Lee Hsien Loong's blog, if you observe it on a weekly basis, you clearly see there is some serious thought given to what he says, how he shares it. So I think I'm of the opinion that there is someone thinking through this and managing it well. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, tying it back to marketing and communications, which is our arena.
Right.
So how do you think? I mean, one aim a brand would have when they want to communicate to their audiences is, they have goals in mind.
Right.
So how do you think the government has done so far in reaching its audience and communicating to the audience what it wants to say?
Right. So in terms of, so to speak, political marketing, I think what's really good, again, is the fact that they've opened up. They are relatively more open to feedback and inputs and discussions, which I think has a huge implication on the perception of the common mass of either the incumbent party or opposition parties. So I think if the fundamental objective is to reach out to a larger populace and to engage with them more frequently at the grassroots level especially, I think that's something the government has really done well. And when I say government, I'm saying both the major parties, in this case PAP, Workers' Party, and some of the minority parties as well. I think a lot more discussion has been going around about different policies. I think to me this 6.9 million white paper in itself is a very, very bold step, because there was no real need to discuss or debate this openly as it is being.
And it's one of the first time they actually had such a big protest from the public.
So if you look at the Speaker's Corner, I mean, that I still remember the video that I saw on Facebook. In my 12 years in Singapore, I could have never imagined something of this sort happening. So, I come from India originally, and there it's commonplace, right? You have protests, and in fact, as we speak, there is a strike, national strike going on, right? It's very common. But this is unprecedented. Now, again, I don't believe that strikes is always the best way of, managing a democracy. But to me, what I'm really happy is that people are getting to know the facts. People are have an opportunity to kind of evaluate the facts. For example, there's another Facebook page that's come along, is Singapore Stats, Sing Stats, right? Yeah. Which there is someone who's basically taking the data, analyzing the data, and verifying whether it's true. And they're coming up with very interesting, palatable infographics for the common people like you and me to understand and appreciate, whether it's about HDB pricing, whether it's about inflation. So I think that's good. So there's reach, there is engagement, and there's a lot more meaningful debate around policies.
Good
so that's encouraging.
So obviously it's been, from what we talked about, that it's really been, there's been an opening up of information, which in turn you could argue it's a opening up of power, sharing of power to the public, and it's clear that while we don't know what their stand is with traditional media, it's obvious that the government's opening up in this arena.
Very much.
And it's kind of a step forward for the government, and it's interesting to see how it's going to turn out. So thanks, Prantik, for those points.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So stay tuned for the next episode of Marketing TV.